I'm back with meteorologist Dr. Frank, former director of the National Hurricane Center. Dr. Frank, let's talk a little bit about this kind of distinctive warm period. We see it to the tip of the graph,
right here,
the very end, a surge of warming. And talk about Dr. James Hansen, the NASA scientist, considered sort of the apostle of global warming.
Absolutely.
And giving testimony before Congress. Talk about that.
Well, first of all, you need to point out that it has warmed the last 150 years. Nobody is debating that. I don't know a skeptic that wouldn't acknowledge that we have had warming over the last 150 plus years.
And how much warming?
Oh, I would say 1 to 2 degrees or something like that.
Somewhere in the range. Yeah, and that's what the data shows.
Right. But it was hot 1,000 years ago. As a matter of fact, they farmed in Greenland for 400 years.
Wow.
It was warm enough then. And it was hot during the Roman period, during the time of Christ, 2000. It was warm 3,000 years ago. So here you have these peaks, but there's no peaks down here in the carbon dioxide levels that would match these peaks up here.
But you mentioned an interesting gimmick that Hansen was able to use on the day of his testimony.
Absolutely.
What did he do?
Now, you remember we talked about the fact that in the 80s and the 90s, carbon dioxide was increasing, and also the Earth's temperature was increasing. So Hansen said, let me put that relationship into this numerical model that I have. Well, if you tell the numerical model to forecast warming, it is going to forecast warming. So he put this in his model, and he ran this model out 100 years and said, boy, we are frying the Earth. Now, it's interesting. The day that Hansen made this statement was June the 7th, as I recall, in 1988. They looked back through the records in Washington, D.C., and they found out that June the 7th historically was the hottest day. So they decided, we're going to make the announcement on June the 7th. Well, it turned out it was a hot day. They went in the night before and opened all the windows and let all this hot air in this building. So in a very hot day, in a very hot room, he announced that we are destroying the Earth.
And of course, for the typical congressman, when he starts sweating, he thinks, "Oh my God, this is a crisis!" Because obviously, we're going to fry the whole earth because I'm getting hot. Now, we're sometimes reminded that there is, in fact, an important distinction between weather and climate.
Absolutely.
Let's explain that distinction. Is weather the seasonal fluctuation of temperature, whereas climate is a kind of annual average?
Well, climate would be the long-term average.
Right.
Weather is what we experience today and tomorrow, and the hurricane, the winter blizzard, and the February cold snap that we had. That's weather. Now, if you average this over a period of months and maybe years, then you get the climate.
Now, you mentioned with Dr. Hansen models. I think that's critical because I think you made the point to Debbie and me that you've got, here you are, you're out there, you're at the Hurricane Center, you're looking at actual hurricanes, you've gone to places like Galveston and photographed the coast. In fact, one of your innovations at the Hurricane Center was to take before and after pictures. You take pictures of the coast. Later, if a hurricane hits, you go back so you can show people what damage the hurricane did. And by contrast with you, you've got these academics who have no direct experience with any of this, and what they do is they cook models.
That's right.
And your point is that they rig the models in a sense because they'll pick a warming period.
That's right.
And then they plug that into the computer and they go, it's the kind of good old economist tool, all other things being equal, but all other things aren't equal. But if you pick this piece of data and you project from there, naturally you're going to see continuous warming, right?
Absolutely. And again, I remind you that in the 80s and the 90s, there was good correlation between carbon dioxide and the Earth's temperature. And so when you build that relationship into the model and you forecast that the carbon dioxide is going to continue to increase, I'm telling you the model is going to forecast warming.
Exactly. There's a phrase in statistics called GIGO, which is garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely.
So what you get out of the sausage machine is pretty much what you put in. And that's what you're saying is going on. What do you think if carbon dioxide is not the primary cause of these fluctuations, what is?
Well, there's many opportunities. The Chinese are focusing on the sun. This big ball of energy that we see out there every day. It's hard to look at the way we measure the energy from the sun and correlate to weather. That's a difficult task, but they are indirectly finding ways that they can correlate what happens on the sun with what's happening in the weather. Now, one of the ways that we measure the activity on the sun is sunspots. All right, the sunspot cycle, when there's a lot of sunspot, that means the sun is very active. And in the 80s and the 90s, and so far, it's been very active. But now what's happening is the sunspot activity is reducing back to the same levels it was some 150, 200 years ago. And so a lot of the Chinese are saying, whoa, we may be in for a cooling cycle rather than a warming cycle. So sun would be one of the things that we look at.
Very interesting. When we come back, I'm going to ask Dr. Frank about all the various things that are attributed to climate change, right. Rising oceans, storms, hurricanes, and we'll find out if it is really true that we are seeing more hurricanes, more storms, more rising oceans, and if that can be reasonably blamed on so-called climate change. We'll be right back.